So, starting off with what we mean by a delivery model. So, delivery model is the approach you're delivering your retrofit program. So, hopefully, it should include things like your processes, methodologies, and strategies in order to deliver it. You also want to be able to have a delivery model that can help you achieve delivery effectively and efficiently. And then lastly, a delivery model is supposed to aid you to meet your goals and objectives. So whether that's to achieve EPC Band C by 2030, net zero by 2050, or other kind of council or local targets that you might have. It could even be alleviating fuel poverty in a certain area. So the whole point of a delivery model is really to make sure that you can achieve your goals and objectives. Now, there are different types of delivery models, and although we've listed four on here, I'm sure there are many more, and they're kind of labels or ways in which we can start to categorize how you can pull together an effective delivery plan. And so the first is around area-based, measure-based, resident-based, and then strategic alignment. So we'll go through each of these individually. So if we start with area-based or place-based, this one has kind of cropped up quite a lot over the last few years, and especially with the local authority retrofit accelerator or the LARA toolkit, they've come up with a place-based approach for different councils. So if you haven't heard of that, actually it's a worthwhile toolkit that you should take a look at. But what we mean by area-based is encouraging spatial delivery considerations. So identifying clusters of projects in a specific location, neighborhood, or area, so that it allows for more effective delivery. And so if you've got a row of terraced houses all in the same place, they're likely to be the same kind of archetype. They'll likely have the same sort of solutions. So by delivering all of those projects all as one go, rather than only just a couple of houses and then 2 years later come back and do the other two houses, you want to be able to deliver it all in one go. And the benefits for doing this are hopefully it allows for a more effective delivery and reduces the cost because you can use contractors in one location and send them out to deliver retrofit in one place. Hopefully it helps with time. So rather than getting your contractors to run around the place and delivering in lots of different places, it's all situated in one place. And then also it helps with things like resident engagement. So if you're engaging with residents in a local area all in one go, you're more likely to get engagement and kind of being able to help gentrify an area as well if needed. So it helps really develop communities alongside the retrofit works and really adding social value. So what do we mean by measure-based? This is project-based development on kind of a measure basis. So we use this quite a lot at Tanner and Townsend when we're developing strategies for organizations, because what you want to do is when you've developed retrofit programs, you create building passports for what measures or solutions you provide to a specific archetype or home. So you package those measures up and say, okay, well, for this archetype, it's a cavity wall property. So we know it's going to likely need cavity wall insulation, maybe some boroscoping to do some initial kind of checks and assessments of the properties. And we know it needs loft insulations and windows and doors. Those are your package of measures that you're likely to roll out. So doing a measure-based approach, it means you can assign contractors really easily. You can, know what your procurement route is going to be, and then being able to also identify clusters of work happening in the same area. So now you can see an area-based approach and a measure-based approach kind of merging into one. What we would do is look at a certain area. We have these archetypes. These are the package of measures we need. So these are likely the contractors we're going to need. The next is a resident-based approach. So this one is slightly more tricky, I guess, with some organizations. So especially if you're a housing association or local authority where you've got stock, but in between those homes is other landlords or other private tenants even, and it makes the delivery really difficult. So doing it on a resident-based approach, as I said before, if you engage residents in a certain area, the willingness to partake for even some of those private or infill homes will likely be better. So the other part to resident-based approach is actually the prioritization. So when you're developing these retrofit programs, you want to use insights from your residents to know who's willing to take part in this. When you've collected data in the past and you've turned up to the property, have you had refusals happen before? If so, is it wise to go back to those same properties? or should you wait for them to get void? All of these kinds of questions you need to ask when you're thinking about that resident based approach. The other is things like complaints programs or complaints and issues. So if you talk to your communications team, hopefully you have a log of those residents that have previously complained about damp and mold problems or previously complained about things not working properly. And then you can have a look at those data to figure out whether or not there is a resident-based approach for you to carry out retrofit works where they've already got existing complaints. So as you'll start to see, the delivery models are really based around the data that you can achieve with or data you can collect from your housing. So the next is strategic alignment. So this is more of like a principle, I guess, rather than maybe a delivery model. But when you're developing a delivery program, you want to make sure that the program you're delivering can help strategically align with existing programs. The benefits for doing this, again, are help save costs. You don't have to go visit the property more than once or twice to carry out the same works. You're doubling down on kind of resources. Also, it helps get buy-in from those senior teams where they don't really understand the purpose of retrofit works. When they know that they've got the business as usual approach, they need to do their asset replacements. So yeah, we really recommend, where possible, when you're developing your delivery programs, strategically aligning it to business as usual or existing programs. So examples of this is if you've got window and door programs for between kind of now and 2030, when are those recent window and door replacements coming up and where are they? Could you potentially align it so that you have the energy efficiency works happen at the same time? So, rather than just replacing it with normal windows and doors, can you replace it with energy efficient windows and doors? Whilst you're also refitting the windows and doors, it probably makes sense to carry out the external wall insulation as well. Things like bathroom and kitchen replacements, people don't really understand how this could align with energy efficiency works. But if you're ripping out kitchens and bathrooms, there's a really good opportunity there for you to do some internal wall insulations, the more really disruptive measures that you might not think about. Then there's also things like ventilation. So when you're doing energy efficiency work, there's ventilation strategies that you have to incorporate. So by doing bathroom and kitchen replacements, you can think about those ventilation strategies. Voids, this is a great opportunity. You can do all kinds of measures because no one's in the home. It's not going to be as disruptive. You don't have to deal with the residents. So if you have void properties coming up, it's identifying when those properties may be becoming void, or if you know a property is going to be becoming void, and carrying out those works when you can. Then there are things like roof replacements. So if you have any roof replacements coming up, a great opportunity again for you to carry out some solar panels because you're replacing the roof, you're putting the scaffolding, you're paying for it. Why not, whilst you're there, also install some solar panels? Heating replacements. So if you have any heating replacements coming up, rather than just replacing it with your standard boiler, is there an opportunity now for you to look at the low carbon heating alternative? So having a look at where you've got boiler replacements, could there be a pilot here, or could there be a few homes that we can trial to get some of those low carbon heatings done? Or if you've rolled it out before, then again, a great opportunity to start phasing out and looking at electrification of heating. The other existing work programs are things like decent homes. So where you've got HHSRS kind of health safety rating systems, so that people might report there are issues with things like damp and mold, issues with other things that might be happening in the property. So if there are already complaints and issues with the property, this is a good kind of time to then think about, right, well, there's damp problems. We're going to have to rip out the plaster, replaster the walls. So it's a really good opportunity for us whilst we're there. We might as well do the insulation. We might as well do the ventilation measures to help improve the ventilation and hopefully alleviate some of those damp and mold problems you're having. And then the last example is fire safety works. So again, another really, really big issue that obviously with the recent Grenfell, we know how important it is to make buildings fire safe. But when you're going out there and ripping out all the cladding, paying for the scaffolding, which is really expensive, there is a great opportunity there as well to make sure that you're using materials that are fire safe and installing kind of EWI work. So now that we know about those different kinds of models and what to kind of consider to develop those delivery models, the next thing you might, or how to actually develop it into a program, is firstly, it all starts with data. So what data do you need and what data do you have to be able to help identify these different types of delivery models? So firstly, you need property data. You really need to understand how your property works, where it's situated. So, for example, if it's situated in areas of natural beauty or conservation areas, or it's a listed building, you'll know that the solutions for those properties are likely to be a little bit more tricky. So, then developing programs of works again makes it more tricky. And then it feeds into your project plan as well, because if you've got properties in areas of outstanding natural beauty or listed buildings, you'll probably have to build in an additional 6 months to account for some of those planning works. The other types of data you need is socioeconomic data. So this will help you with the prioritization of understanding where is an appropriate place to carry out some of those delivery works. So I might want to prioritize looking at fuel poor areas. There is a specific neighborhood where fuel poverty seems to be a key problem and energy efficiency is not great. So I can start with this, have a look at what homes there are there, what measures are going to be needed, and focus on that area and those residents. So there you've kind of ticked off your area-based approach, your resident-based approach, and your measure-based approach. And then the strategic alignment, where you might want to identify, okay, well, we've looked at that neighbourhood. Now let's have a look at what planned works are going to happen in that neighbourhood over the next 5 years. Can we bring forward any of our programs so that we can account for some of those costs? So where do we get all of this data? So the first place is open source data. That's lots of data online at the moment to be able to better understand your properties. So you can get EPC and SAP data off the open data source. You can find out whether your property is on or off gas, IMD, the tenures for the property, fuel poverty, all these different things you can get from open databases. And you'll probably have a lot of this within your housing systems already. The next is internal departments. So, you'll have a tenure program, or you'll have the benefits program, plans works. You'll even know heat network sites where there could be opportunities for some of those properties in an area to tap into some of those heat network sites. Asset management systems. So this will tell you again energy performance of the home as well as kind of building characteristics. But more importantly, it will tell you about the planned works that are expected to happen in those properties. So, we've got 100 homes happening in Firepool over the next 5 years. We're expecting 80 of those homes to have window and door replacements. So could that be an opportunity there where you've already got planned works to target those properties to carry out delivery of energy efficiency? Then you've got census data. So this will tell you a little bit more information about the residents actually in the property. And this can also help with understanding some of the challenges you might face when having to create a delivery program, where for example, if you have people that don't speak English as their first language, will you have to create resident engagement strategies that will have print it out in different languages so that they feel included and they understand what works are being carried out. And then there's just local knowledge. So this is qualitative data. So you can go out and talk to residents. A lot of the on-the-ground tenant liaison officers or housing officers you might actually know about the area and the people in those homes. Building those relationships with your residents will really provide some useful insights into how people feel about retrofit and what kinds of things do they want to see within their homes. And then you've also got your complaints team as well. So there are 5 factors about a project that really need to be considered when you're gathering data. So the first is, what is the coverage of the service that needs to be delivered? So how far do you want to take this delivery program? Are you looking at your whole stock? Are you focusing on specific areas? Have you got a limited budget? Is that your scope? Are you just focusing on those below EPC band C? Are you not looking at low carbon heating because you've not done it before, so you have to prioritize fabric? What is the scope that you're looking to achieve out of this project? And so one of the things we recommend, and if you're not in our one-to-one support, I do recommend asking your support manager about a value setting workshop to really understand what is it, the scope of that project you're looking to achieve, so that you can narrow down what to prioritize. Solution. So how may this be done? How are you going to deliver the works? Is it something that you've done before? Have you got the contractors in place to be able to do it? Is it going to be feasible with the budget you have? So thinking about the solution. Delivery, so again, who's best placed to do this? Is it something that, you're able to do, or you're going to have to hire a lot of external consultants to support you in developing those programs? Is it going to require a lot of additional contractors because your existing ones don't cover the scope of, let's say, installing air source heat pumps? And then you've got things like implementation. When and in what form can it be implemented? So when's going to be realistic for it to happen? Are you setting yourself realistic timelines? And then lastly is funding. So what will it cost and how shall it be paid for? So you've got planned budgets in your programs already. So it's working out what is the current existing financial budget for the next 5 years for your department, and what's the financial shortfall? Where do you need to find some additional money to top up to be able to deliver those programs? So once you've thought about the delivery model and looked at how you want to prioritize, the next step is to start shortlisting this. So you start from quite a wide scope of, right, these are all the properties in our areas. This is the broad message of what we want to achieve. How do we shortlist it to fit the strategic fit? So, it makes strategic sense to be doing these retrofits. How do I achieve value for money? Is there supply capacity and capability to deliver this number of homes that we're looking to deliver? How can we afford this? And what is achievable to deliver in a 3-5 year timeframe that you have in mind? So again, actually, a lot of this is taken from the Lara toolkit. So they've got a really detailed plan about how you might look at shortlisting. So I recommend looking at that. But it starts by thinking about your preferred option. So again, I'm going back to an example we delivered recently for a council where they said to us, we're not going to touch low carbon heating for the next kind of 5 years because we haven't got the skill sets, we haven't got the contractors in place. It's not something we've done before. So we want to slowly pilot a few cases before we ramp up delivery for some of those low carbon heating installations. We also want to start with low win or easy kind of delivery measures like cavity wall installations, loft top-ups, and do all of those first because we're used to it, with a few pilots for things like difficult to treat properties, and then ramping up the delivery once you've had those lessons learned, you've understood how to deliver it, and then ramping up the delivery to increase the scale of retrofit. So it's thinking about what your preferred option is. What are you looking to achieve for this short term? Even though you've thought about your long-term goal, what is the short-term kind of shortlisting option? So now we've thought about the delivery model, how do we put this into a project plan? So project planning kind of happens in 5 different steps. So you start with the project conception and an initiation, and then you've got the project defining and planning. So this is where you start to do the shortlisting. There'll be a lot of trial and error, a lot of back and forth, a lot of working through to see if it's going to be possible. And then once you've defined that project and you know how you're going to deliver it, you know what the risks are, you know what the budget is, you know what the scope and targets are, you can then start to pull together a project execution plan. So that's when you start to look at, right, how am I going to report, or hopefully you found out how you're going to report, but what kind of reporting do I need to do to make sure that I'm on track? And then you've got things like the project performance and control. So thinking about what objectives and deliverables do I need to have in place? What effort and cost am I putting into this? How can I continually track my performance? And then lastly is the project close. So once you've delivered the project, you can then think about what post-works reviews do I need to be doing? What handovers need to happen? What additional reporting might you need in place? So when developing project plans, there are different project management methodologies. So often built into, how registered providers have managed projects over the years, there are lots of different solutions. And one of the ones that kind of is most common is the waterfall methodology. And the waterfall methodology is kind of a traditional approach to project management. It's kind of the tasks and phases are completed in a linear and kind of sequential manner. And each of those projects must be completed before you can get on to the next stage. So you can understand what the dependencies are based on those different tasks. You then also got the agile methodology. So this is where comes from kind of a growing dissatisfaction to a linear approach of kind of the traditional methodologies. So one of the frustrations with those linear methodologies is that it couldn't adapt with the project as it progressed. So hopefully you can kind of do things iteratively to be able to figure out what works and what doesn't work to be able to achieve your goal. And then you've got the Kanban methodology, which is another agile approach to project management. And the term Kanban has kind of evolved from a denote of a framework in which tasks are represented visually as a progress through columns or a Kanban board. And then you've got the Scrum methodology, which is a form of, again, agile management. So you can think of it more like a framework as a project management methodology. So within a Scrum, work is kind of split into short cycles known as sprints, which usually last about 1 to 2 weeks. So work is kind of taken from a backlog for each sprint iteration. And then you've got the critical path method. So it's a way of identifying and scheduling all of those critical tasks that compromise your project as well as their dependencies. And the last one then is the critical chain project management. So how it differs from the critical path method, it defines the length of time needed to get each critical activity done from the beginning to the end of the project. Sometimes that can get a little bit unrealistic. So the critical chain project management addresses those issues for allowing a bit more time for human elements of your project, like delays and resourcing issues. So the reason why we're talking about project management methodologies is when you're delivering or developing your project plan, you want to think about what your methodology for managing the project looks like to be able to develop that plan. So when you're pulling together that plan, then kind of a few basics on the structure and format of what those plans should look like. So plans can kind of take note in lots of different formats. So you can do it in different softwares like Microsoft Projects. You can do it in a simple Microsoft Excel sheet. Or you might have smart kind of software systems in place like Prince2 or other software systems that already kind of do those formats for you. When you're thinking about a project plan, it should list tasks line by line and include what the forecast date is for starting, the end date, the duration that task is going to take place, how that task relates to milestones that you're looking to achieve, and making sure people responsible for each of those tasks have been assigned. And usually you can do this in a Gantt chart. As I said, it's not the only way to pull together a project plan, but you can include it in a Gantt chart. The plan should also show clear dependencies and gateway reviews. So either through adding kind of columns, which says one column saying, right, task 1 is related to task 2, or task 3 is related to task 15. So you can show what the dependencies are as you go through. And the gateway reviews are after you've kind of achieved a certain milestone, usually there's a good point for a gateway review. So for example, when we're developing strategies for councils, one of the gateways reviews is once we've done the kind of initial data review, we will sit down with the council to say, right, this is a good point where we can start talking about how these are the kind of archetypes we've identified. Does that fit with you? And these targets that we're assigning to these different archetypes, does that fit with what you're looking for? Are these measures that we're selecting fit for how you would deliver? It can also be, once we've developed a program, we can then look at the year-by-year investment for those programs and say, right, you can see here there's like a massive hike in 2028 to 2029, because that's when you wanted to start introducing low carbon heating. Is that feasible with your current budgets, or would you like to shift to have a few of them happen before or after? So those gateway reviews are a chance for decisions to be made before being able to progress on to the next step. So dependencies. These dependencies are kind of the relationship between one task or the other. So the reason why they're so important is dependencies have a direct impact on the progress of a project. So from finish to start, the task dependencies kind of require a preceding task to conclude in order to begin the next one. So understanding the task dependencies enables you to kind of work out a proper flow of tasks and an optimal route for your projects. So for example, you might have a program where it's in a neighborhood, in a conservation area or outstanding natural beauty. So within that, one of the dependencies is being able to get the planning permissions done. So if you know you're going to spend a long time being able to do planning permissions, you might need to make sure that happens early in the program to allow for enough time in delivery. There are also things like past 2035 assessments, so you're not going to be able to carry out the works until you've had those assessments done to the properties. You're not going to be able to close off a project until a project has been kind of lodged. So again, linking to the different kind of critical paths and being able to achieve milestones. So what does a good project plan look like? So the plan is supposed to tell a story and show its kind of critical path and milestones from beginning to end. So this is a very blurry but hopefully visible example of what a project plan might look like. Now, there are good and bad things about this. At the moment, it's quite small, and the reason it's quite small is because we tried to include as much detail in that space as we had. But as you can see on the left, the first column, that is your work breakdown structure. So you've got a clear breakdown of what specific tasks need to take place. So, for example, you might want to start with mobilization works as a work breakdown structure. You want to list out all the tasks that are related to mobilization. Then within those tasks, you'll also want to mention how it relates to some of those milestones. So, for example, a milestone might be completing all your retrofit assessments. So you might want to put in, okay, completing all my retrofit assessments, that's related to this milestone. Or if it's complete mobilization or establish a project team, that's related to this milestone. So making sure that you've referenced the milestones within those tasks. The second column along is the responsibilities assigned. So each task should be assigned to a person responsible for carrying out those, whether that's internal or external. Then you've got things like the dependencies. So you can see here a little arrow where it says, right, the mobilization starts here, so we're not going to be able to start delivery for, until we've done the mobilization. So that is a dependency. Now, these are quite generic work breakdown structures, and we'll talk a bit about that after this. The next is timescales. So you want to make sure you've got clear timescales, accounting for things like holidays, bank holidays, Christmas periods, things like that, because they will have an impact on your project plan. The other thing you can see here is cash flow, and not everyone does this, but it's really important to map the cash flow of the delivery of the project. So if you're going to expect to spend £35,000 between this month and this month, and then the next month you're looking to spend £500,000, you need to figure out when that cash is happening each month and when the drawdown of payments might be. So the next is so when we're talking about a work breakdown structure, we want a clear breakdown of activity with a description of what this activity will entail. So you can have different levels of work breakdown structures. So you might want to break down your program by the different clusters of projects or neighborhoods of works. For example, I might have 100 homes in Priorswood, so I might want to start with that's my first level. The second level is then mobilization, and the third level is then resident engagement activities, whatever it might be, as long as there's a suitable structure for it. So what we've done here is shown what it is by neighborhoods, but then there's also the considerations of the retrofit journey. So you might want to, as I said, start with mobilization. You'll consider things like establishing the project team, establishing what your procurement activity is, so releasing tenders, doing the marking, all of those different things, they need to be specifically labeled out. So established project team is too generic and it's too high level. What specific roles need to be established? So it could be retrofit coordinator on board, tenant liaison officers onboarded. All these different things have to be broken down into as much detail as possible. Then you've got things like the pre-works, tenant engagement. So when are you sending out specific letters? When are you doing some door knocking? When are you having specific events happening for those neighborhoods? Then you've got things like the dwelling assessments. So before actually doing any installation of works, you might need specific dwelling assessments. So it could be past 2035. It could be additional detailed assessments like boroscoping. And then you also need to start setting up your design and coordination for those properties as well. And then you've got during installation. So it's not just carry out installation. It has to have some detail broken down into it. So it could be, what are the enabling works that need to happen? What prelim works need to happen? Right, so we need to set up some scaffolding. So scaffolding should be kind of broken down. Then we also need to do cavity wall insulation. But before we do cavity wall insulation, we need to do cavity wall extraction. So again, that kind of needs to be listed down before you then get into, right, installation of EWI or CWI. And then lastly, you've got post work. So once you've done the installation, it doesn't end. You still have the resident handover and visits. You've still got the past 2035 and energy lodgements. And again, you can't carry out the installation before you've carried out the mobilization. Likewise, with the post-works, you can't carry out before you've done the installation. So it's thinking about what the dependencies for each of these things are. So for example, I can't start my EWI work for a high-rise block of flats until I've done the scaffolding. So against each of one of these different activities, you also want to start thinking about how does this relate to a milestone or a KPI? What's the cash flow? So have I accounted for things like the scaffolding costs? What are the dependencies? And also what are the risks as well that you might not have accounted for? So moving on to the last section now, look at other considerations. So when you're pulling together your delivery models and your project plan, you'll now want to start thinking about how does this impact other things? So if you're looking to deliver works as part of a consortium, one of the things you might need to consider is what is your consortium plan? So as a consortium, you should consider how you're going to capture consortium activity. So if you're a consortium lead, that includes things like consortium governance meetings, reporting, when each of the individuals are sending over things for your reporting, capturing what others are doing for their delivery. So you need to include what the consortium activity looks like. Then you'll look at agreeing a work breakdown structure for your consortium plan. So if you're all delivering as a consortium, you should all agree on what that work breakdown structure looks like. So whether that's starting with level 1 of, okay, let's start it breaking down by mobilization works, during installation works, post works, agree what those levels of work breakdown structure is, so that when you're pulling together the consortium plan, you can say, right, we know this organization, this organization, this organization are planning on delivering 100 homes against this activity this month. That way it makes it easier for your consortium lead to do the reporting, but also it helps you understand what each of your consortium members are doing. If you are a consortium member rather than a consortium lead, you should also make sure that you're pulling together a plan on a page. So it should follow that agreed work breakdown structure, but it should be one single page of what that project looks like. The other things that should be included are things like how many homes you're expected to deliver and the cash flow against each of those different agreed milestones as well. So as I mentioned, the other thing that you'll need to consider is things like risks. So your risk will impact your project plan. So you have to ensure that you've developed a detailed risk register, and you can use the PESTLE approach, which stands for political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. So thinking about what risks are political. So for example, it could be the general election that's happening. Economic, is there cost variations that you think you're expected to happen? Social, is there anything in terms of resident refusals that's worth putting down? Technological, are there any issues with lodgements at the moment or updating your data onto a system? Legal, are there any kind of planning permissions or issues with kind of party wall agreements or things like that? And then environmental, are there any other kind of external environmental factors that might impact how you deliver it? So example of some of these risks that you might kind of encounter are things like weather. So some measures require a certain conditions for you to be able to install them. So if you're carrying out EWI works, doing EWI works will not be great to do it during the winter because you're having to dig the trenches for EWI to happen underground, so the ground will be quite hard and solid. But then you've also got increased things like rainfall, so again it'll make digging the trenches really difficult, and installing the materials also really difficult. Holiday disruptions, so have you considered what holidays are coming up between those installation periods? So things like Christmas, Eid, or other kind of religious celebrations can lead to resident refusals or delays in work. So do make sure that you've accounted for when those holidays are expected to take place and how it might interact with your delivery plan. The other thing is exams. So one of the reasons for resident refusal sometimes is because, their son or daughter is currently going through exams, so they don't want disruptive works happening whilst they deliver. So making sure that you've got a good resident engagement approach, but you've accounted for some of those risks where delivering during exam periods is going to be difficult. The last consideration then is being agile. So you need to allow for flexibility within your program. For the most well-planned or thought-out programs will still encounter some challenges. And so you want to be able to be flexible or be agile to some of those challenges you face. So, how do you kind of account for an agile approach? So, one example is to make sure that even though you've done your shortlist appraisal of properties you want for your delivery model, back in your back pocket for that wider delivery plan, are there other properties that you can swap in for contingency? Have you spoken to your senior leadership team about what contingency funds there are, or if something went wrong? So you can see here there's like a diagram of the agile methodology. It also follows the same principle for the retrofit approach. So, you start off by doing an assessment of a property. Look at the property, see whether it's fit for purpose. You go through the design stage and actually, okay, it's still fine. And then you go through the kind of consultation stage with your residents before you then looking at the installation. Now, if at each of those stages something falls, you're going to have to go back to the start again to be able to find out, okay, for some reason the property's coming out as already an EPC Band C. So I'm going to need to find other properties to put forward for this instead. Or it might be we've got a resident refusal. How can we adapt to be able to encourage a resident to take up on this offer? Is it that we need to push back and happen after holiday periods or exam periods? Or is it the fact that no, it's an outright no, and you're going to have to revisit that property maybe when it becomes void or they've moved on from the property? So it's thinking about how you can make your project as agile as possible and that you've thought about those risks. And that is it.